In the spring of 1922, a small farmstead in rural Bavaria became the site of one of the most disturbing unsolved crimes in European history. 6 people were murdered with a farming tool called a mattock. And then, for 3 days afterward, someone stayed in the house with the bodies. They fed the livestock. They lit fires in the hearth. They ate the family's food. And then they vanished. More than 100 years later, nobody knows who did it. The farm was called Hinterkaifeck. It sat about 70 kilometers north of Munich, deep in the Bavarian countryside, surrounded by dense forest and connected to the nearest village by a single dirt road. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's business and strangers were noticed immediately. The family who lived there, the Grubbers, had owned the land for generations. Andreas Grubber, 63 years old, ran the farm with his wife Kazilia, who was 72. Living with them was their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, age 35, and Victoria's 2 children. 7-year-old Kazilia, named after her grandmother, and 2-year-old Joseph. The 6th person on the farm was Maria Baumgartner, the new maid. She had arrived that very morning, March 31, 1922. It was her first day of work. It would also be her last. But before we get to that night, you need to understand what had been happening at Hinterkaifeck in the weeks before the murders. Because something was very wrong at that farm, and everyone who lived there knew it. 6 months before the killings, the previous maid, a woman named Crescence Rieger, quit without warning. When asked why, she told people she had heard footsteps above her head at night. Footsteps in the attic. She had gone up to check. Nobody was there. She became convinced the farmhouse was haunted and refused to spend another night under its roof. Then, in March, just days before the murders, Andreas Grubber made a discovery that should have changed everything. He found footprints in the fresh snow. They led from the edge of the forest directly to the farm's machine room, where a lock on the door had been broken. But here is the detail that makes this case unlike any other. The footprints only went in one direction. Toward the farm. There were no tracks leading back to the forest. Whoever had come out of those woods was still on the property. Andreas told his neighbors about the tracks. He mentioned that a set of house keys had gone missing. He found a newspaper from Munich on the property that nobody in the family had purchased or subscribed to. That same week, the family heard footsteps in the attic again. Andreas searched the space himself and found nothing. Despite all of this, he did not call the police. A neighbor offered to lend him a gun. He declined. On the evening of March 31, 1922, the killer struck. The exact sequence of events has been reconstructed by investigators over the decades, though some details remain uncertain. What is known is that the victims were lured or led, one by one, into the barn. Andreas Grubber was the first to die. He was struck in the head with a mattock, a heavy tool with a pick on one side and an axe blade on the other. His wife Kazilia was next. Then Victoria. Then 7-year-old Kazilia. The little girl did not die immediately. The autopsy later revealed that she had pulled out clumps of her own hair while lying in the barn, a sign of extreme distress. Investigators believe she may have been alive for several hours after the attack, lying beside the bodies of her mother, grandmother, and grandfather in the darkness of the barn. After killing 4 members of the family in the barn, the killer walked into the house. Inside, they found 2-year-old Joseph in his crib and Maria Baumgartner, the maid who had arrived just hours earlier. Both were killed with the same mattock. Maria had only been at Hinterkaifeck for a single day. She knew nothing about the family. She had no enemies. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then something happened that elevates this case from a horrific crime to something deeply unsettling. The killer did not leave. For 3 days, possibly longer, someone remained at the Hinterkaifeck farm. They fed the cattle. They tended to the dog. They stoked the fire. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney by neighbors in the days following the murders. Someone was living in that house, surrounded by 6 dead bodies, going about the daily routines of farm life as if nothing had happened. This detail has haunted investigators for over a century. Why would someone stay? Were they waiting for something? Were they searching for something? Or was this simply someone so disconnected from normal human emotion that the presence of the dead meant nothing to them? For days passed before anyone raised the alarm. On April 4th, a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer noticed that the Grubber family had not been seen in days. Their mail was piling up. Young Kazilia had not appeared at school. Schlittenbauer gathered 2 other men, Michael Pohl and Jacob Sigel, and the 3 of them walked to the farm. What happened next added another layer of suspicion to an already impossible case. The men found all the doors locked. They broke through a gate to enter the barn. Inside, they discovered 4 bodies. Andreas, Kazilia, Victoria, and young Kazilia, stacked together, partially covered with hay, as if someone had attempted to conceal them. Then Schlittenbauer did something strange. He walked to the front door of the house and opened it without difficulty. The door that had been locked moments before. He entered the house alone, while the other 2 men stayed outside. Inside, he found the bodies of Maria Baumgartner and 2-year-old Joseph. The question that would follow Schlittenbauer for the rest of his life was simple. How did he open a locked door? A key had gone missing from the Grubber household days before the murders. Did Schlittenbauer have it? Why did he enter the house alone? What did he know? The police investigation began the following day, and it was, by modern standards, a disaster. Dozens of curious villagers trampled through the crime scene before investigators arrived. The bodies were examined, but the autopsies were rudimentary. Dr. Johann Baptist Ormuller determined that all 6 victims died from blunt force trauma to the head. The murder weapon, a mattock, was found in the loft of the barn. Over 100 suspects were questioned in the years that followed. Lorenz Schlittenbauer was among the first. He had a complicated relationship with the Grubber family. He had been romantically involved with Victoria, and there were questions about the paternity of her son Joseph. Schlittenbauer may have been the boy's father. He had financial obligations to the family that he reportedly resented. He knew the farm intimately. He had access. He had motive. But the investigation went deeper than one suspect. The Grubber family had secrets of their own. In 1915, Andreas and his daughter Victoria were convicted in court of having an incestuous relationship that had lasted from 1907 to 1910. Andreas was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Victoria served 1 month. The conviction was public knowledge in the community and brought enormous shame to the family. Some investigators have theorized that Joseph, the 2-year-old, may have been the product of this relationship rather than Schlittenbauer's child. This opened a tangled web of motives. Schlittenbauer, humiliated by the possibility that the child he was supporting was not his. Neighbors who harbored deep resentment toward the Grubbers for the scandal. A traveling stranger who stumbled upon an isolated farm. Even a political connection emerged. A man named Adolf Gump, linked to the far-right Freikorps Oberland paramilitary organization, was identified as a suspect within the first week. But no arrest was ever made. The case file grew thicker with each passing decade. The skulls of the victims were removed during the autopsies and sent to clairvoyants in Munich, a practice that was not unusual in rural Bavaria at the time but yielded no useful information. The skulls were later lost. The farm itself was demolished in 1923, destroying whatever physical evidence might have remained. In 1955, the police officially closed the case. But the story refused to die. In 2007, students at the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy in Bavaria reopened the Hinterkaifeck files as a cold case exercise. Using modern investigative techniques and criminal profiling, they re-examined every piece of evidence that still existed. They narrowed their list to a single primary suspect. But out of respect for living relatives, they never released the name. Their conclusion was sobering. Even with modern forensic science, too much time had passed. The evidence was too degraded. The witnesses were all dead. The Hinterkaifeck murders would never be solved. And so the questions remain. Who walked out of that forest and into the farm that March? Why did they stay for 3 days after killing 6 people? What were they looking for? And how did they vanish so completely that a century of investigation has produced not a single definitive answer? 6 people. A mattock. 3 days of silence. And a darkness in the Bavarian woods that has never been explained. The Hinterkaifeck farm is gone now. Demolished. The land returned to forest and field. But the case endures, passed from generation to generation, studied by criminologists and true crime researchers around the world. It is a reminder that some crimes do not fade with time. They only grow stranger. And somewhere, buried in the archives of a Bavarian police station, there is a file with over 100 names in it. One of them might be the killer. But after 100 years, we will never know which one.